Secretary Granholm, demand for electricity is soaring. It's skyrocketing, in fact. This is happening for a number of reasons, including due to the emergence of AI, of data centers, semiconductor reshoring, clean tech manufacturing, and of course, electric vehicle use. A recent New York Times report addressed this issue and estimated that electricity demand from data centers alone, without taking into account any of those other factors, is going to triple by 2030, just in the next 6 years, using as much power as 40 million homes. Now, NERC has sounded the alarm, and NERC sounded that alarm by regarding this pending reliability crisis that's coming, due specifically to the lack of electricity supply. Demand is soaring, and it's soaring at the same time when the premature retirement of coal-fired power generation units is happening, and it's happening without replacement dispatchable generation capabilities. And so these factors have led to an over-reliance on sources like wind and solar, sources that, while clean, are entirely weather-dependent and can't give us a source of base load energy supply. Grid-scale battery technology is often touted as the answer to this, but of course grid-scale battery technology is nowhere close to being ready for deployment and use. So, Madam Secretary, do you dispute NERC's findings on this, or is it true that we have a reliability crisis looming?
We certainly have a looming demand for energy crisis, and NERC, I think, put 91 gigawatts to that by 2033 that we would have to add to account for the increase in demand.
Okay. Now, in the meantime, I'd like to get a yes or a no answer out of this one, if you can. Yes or no, does the Biden administration support a transition to net zero?
Yes.
Okay. Now, look, the basic laws of supply and demand tell us that if we don't get our act together, we'll see rolling blackouts across the country. And yet you continue to advocate for a transition, even a rapid transition, to net zero. According to a report compiled by McKinsey & Company in 2022, quote, global spending on physical assets on the course to net zero would need to reach about $275 trillion by 2050, or $9.2 trillion per year on average. Now, this factor, of course, doesn't consider the economic ripple effects that would stem from more expensive energy and energy being made less reliable. And one also has to consider the impact of lost jobs related to those same factors. It's fair to say that a net zero transition is going to require enormous sacrifice by American families, with low-income households being hit the hardest. This is deeply concerning to every American. It ought to be concerning to Americans of every background, of every political stripe. But more than anything, this isn't so much about left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, as it is rich versus poor. Rich folks can handle significant increases in the price of energy. Poor folks can't, especially when they find that increases in the price of energy spill over into literally everything they buy, into everything that they do. And when you're living at the margins like that, you're not going to be able to handle that. So, Madam Secretary, if the United States, consistent with your ambitions, with your plans, with the ambitions of the Biden administration, if it completely transitions over to get to net zero, exactly how many degrees will global temperatures decrease as a result of moving to net zero?
Well, we want to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 to 2 degrees. The net zero is by 2050, so there is time to be able to get there. If we see temperatures rising greater than that, of course, the costs for poor people and for people overall because of these extreme weather events will be catastrophic.
Okay. But let's get back to my question. If we get to net zero, when we get to net zero, should we get there at some point? If we get there, what impact will that have on global temperatures?
As I say, the striving to net zero is to prevent the temperatures from rising more than 1.5 to 2 degrees.
Yeah, it's still not the answer to the question. The question is, what impact is that going to have? We've just talked about the fact that it's going to cost $275 trillion to get there. And we've talked about the fact that it's going to cost the global economy, $9 or $10 trillion a year in order to get there. So what does that buy us? What does that do? Now, you're saying, yes, we're trying to not have temperatures increase more than the defined amount that you just described. But what impact does this have? What does it do for global temperatures if we get to net zero?
Perhaps I'm not understanding your question. I think I have answered that. And the whole point is to prevent these extreme and accelerating weather events. We have had year after year of record heat. We've had year after year of increased extreme weather events just in this country.
Look, I understand the Biden administration's affinity for blaming everything, including bad weather, on Republicans and on climate change, which they always associate together. And I fail to understand how you can definitively say that a complete transition to net zero is necessary when you don't even know the impact that it would have on global temperatures. You can't tell me sitting here today what it's going to do. You tell me what you fear might happen if we don't do that. You tell me that you think temperatures will increase less if we do this than if we don't. But I don't get this, especially when, if what you're talking about is, a large number, it would seem fanciful and not backed up. If it's a smaller number, it could be dismissed as a rounding error. And meanwhile, you're talking about completely changing the global economy. And given the way the United States tends to honor its legal obligations and its commitments more than other countries do, we can rest assured that it's going to cost the United States a lot more money than it is going to in a lot of places, meaning poor and middle-class Americans will suffer by far more than anyone and everyone else. I find this completely unacceptable. This is reverse Robin Hood. It's talking about stealing from the rich, stealing from the poor to give to the rich. Nobody supports that. And we can't endure it. America's poor and middle class certainly shouldn't have to shoulder this burden.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today.
Slip back in. And Madam Chair did a great job while I was gone. With that, we go to Senator Lee at this time.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here today. Secretary Holland, I understand you've been directly involved with the ongoing management process for the Bears Ears National Monument. Now, the Bears Ears Commission, which was formed following President Obama's creation of the Bears Ears National Monument on December 28, 2016, includes representatives from 5 different tribes. Yes or no, did you commit to that commission, to the Bears Ears Commission, that the commission would be able to draft an alternative that would be designated as the preferred alternative to the management plan?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I would say that that draft plan incorporates considerable input from the Bears Ears Commission, the state of Utah, and other cooperating agencies.
I understand that. I understand that, and it's also my understanding that you made a commitment to the commission that the commission would be able to draft an alternative that would be the preferred designated plan. Now, you and I spoke in December about the Bears Ears land exchange that we had been working with in good faith and put a lot of effort into it really over the last 3 years. And after putting in that much effort on the end of the state of Utah, I was really disappointed with your decision to proceed with a temporary plan instead of a permanent land exchange. But is it any wonder why the state of Utah withdrew from that exchange? Well, it's because of this sort of thing, of the target shifting after the fact. Now, the draft management plan includes the phrase collaboration or coordination, in reference to collaboration coordination with the Bears Ears no fewer than 559 times, while the phrase collaboration with the state of Utah is mentioned only once, and coordination with San Juan County, Utah is not mentioned at all, not a single time, even though this is home to the Bears Ears National Monument. And then, according to the draft plan, and from what I understand of how things unfolded, the commission was provided with over 100 meetings to offer and receive input. And meanwhile, as a cooperating agency, the state of Utah was provided only 6 meetings to offer input into the plan, and 2 of those were listed as input only. So effectively 4 meetings versus 100 meetings. It's quite a disparity. All that Utah has asked for over the years is a real, actual seat at the table. And it's obvious that you've given the Bears Ears Commission a seat and left Utah off in the corner wearing a dunce cap. So it appears to me that the department's weighing stakeholder input disproportionately, far above any position where they're taking with serious or even comparable consideration the affected state and county. The Bears Ears Commission's website, for its part, states openly that it's funded by Resources Legacy Fund, a dark money, radical environmental group. However, the Bears Ears Commission is nowhere to be found on the fund's financial disclosures. It appears that this is just another example of a radical, far-left NGO that's seeking cover to do what it's doing by doing it through tribes. And sadly, you've decided to let the whims and the wishes of this dark money group effectively dictate the management of 1.4 million acres of federal land, land that hardworking people in my state rely on for their livelihood. Look, I want to be clear about something. It isn't too late. It isn't too late to fix this, and I ask that you please do so. The state of Utah, San Juan County, we all stand ready to assist in finding a balanced approach to land management, not only for Bears Ears, but across the entire expanse of the 67% of my state that's owned by the federal government, causing us to feel very much and be very much at the whim and at the caprice of the U.S. Department of the Interior. Look, we all want to work together, but as a state that's occupied to the degree of 67% by your department, we first need a seat at the table. Thank you.
Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here, and thank you for your
Senator Lee. Chief Moore, I'd like to begin by asking you to clarify something, a term that I'm not familiar with. What do you mean by big C versus little c cooperating agency?
Well, so, you know, and it goes back to my experience from many years ago working with the county supervisors, county commissioners, wanting to have a say in what finally happens, you know, in our documents. And there's a way to do that. And I think the way to do that is to have a collaborative process with our publics, in particular our elected officials. And so we think that it's imperative that they be included in what's going on in their part.
It doesn't answer my question in any way. Look, I've got limited time. Maybe you can respond in writing. I really do need to know what the difference is between a big C and a lower C cooperating agency. Not defined in law. I've never heard of it before, not in any of your guidance documents, rules, anything like that. But look, I've got to move on. Just respond to that one in writing if you can. Look, the draft plan for the Manti-La Sal National Forest proposes 122,780 acres of quote-unquote recommended wilderness. This is really concerning to me. Congress passed the Utah Wilderness Act in 1984. It's a product of a long, protracted, hard-fought compromise made by the state of Utah, and it's something that designated wilderness in exchange for assurance that no future Utah wilderness designations would be made. Now, the Forest Service appears to be ignoring this history and both the state and the individual county resource management plans applicable to that area. The only way we get healthy forests is by having flexibility to perform active management of the forests. It turns out, as we've learned over the last few decades, you let the thing just go. That's terrible for forest health. What we're dealing with throughout Utah is this patchwork of designated wilderness, recommended wilderness, and inventoried roadless areas that make active management a nightmare and frankly, practically unachievable. These updated forest plans will only make the situation worse as you've got them drafted. Can you explain how these new wilderness recommendations were developed and why the state and local counties' input was apparently disregarded completely in the preferred alternative?
Yeah, so the forest supervisor is planning to meet with the county supervisors to cooperate on that forest plan issue.
And how'd that go?
It hasn't taken place yet. They are scheduled to have a meeting to discuss this very issue that you're bringing up. We'll be happy to let you know how they go once the meeting takes place.
Yeah, after the draft plan was released, but before that, it apparently didn't happen that way. I don't know why I should have any assurance that it'll go any better now. Now, look, every single state official and county commissioner that I talk to seems to be increasingly frustrated with the way that the Forest Service with the way the Forest Service manages Forest Service land. All these local officials ask for is a real seat at a real table in these important decisions that have to be made, decisions that affect us, our local communities, very directly, much more directly than they do anybody else. We all want healthy forests, and we all want to avoid catastrophic wildfires, but the consequences of bad policy hit some of us a lot more than they hit others. For example, in both the Ashley and the Manti-LaSalle proposals, the Forest Service appears willing to enter into co-management arrangements with tribes. But it refuses to incorporate state and county comments into the planning process. If the Forest Service can enter co-management arrangements with the tribes, why exactly can't it enter into similar arrangements with county governments and the state government?
Senator, we do honor the county government, and we do work with them, same as we work with tribes. In fact, we probably work more with the county governments than we do tribes.
With co-management? Co-management, the same way you got it with the tribes?
No,
It's not been my experience.
Yeah, well, you know, tribes are sovereign nations, so we deal with them differently than...
Yeah. States also are sovereign. They are co-sovereigns. States are co-sovereigns, and tribes also have their own elements of co-sovereignty.
Senator, we deal with the counties, and we work with the counties. They have a seat at the table, and I'm not sure, I'm not sure we're not doing just exactly what you say, because...
Well, I'm certain that you're not. I'm certain that you're not. Look, the 2001 roadless rule establishes prohibition on road construction and on timber harvesting on 58.5 million acres of inventoried roadless areas in National Forest Service lands, National Forest System lands. Has the 2001 roadless rule helped or hindered with wildfire mitigation efforts?
I suppose that's going to depend on your perspective, Senator.
Helped or hindered? Which one?
Well, I don't have a say in whether it helps or hinders. You know, I have to...
But you don't, maybe, regardless of what you do, does it? Just describe it. In your assessment, has it helped or hindered wildfire mitigation efforts?
Well, I don't think it was designed to help wildfire mitigation, sir.
Understood. Thank you. Lee. The Conservation and Landscape Health Rule that you recently finalized elevates non-use either on par with or arguably above multiple use. Now, according to FLPMA, BLM is required to manage for multiple use and for sustained yield, with multiple use referring to things like grazing, timber harvesting, energy, mining, and recreation. Can you cite a provision of FLPMA that allows for you to depart from that standard and to prioritize non-use instead of multiple use and sustained yield? What provision of FLPMA allows you to do that?
Title I, Section 103 is where the multiple use definition occurs in FLPMA, and it is very explicitly clear that managing for fish and wildlife habitat, managing for natural and scenic values, those are direct words from FLPMA, is our responsibility. And
Yeah, look, I understand that, and that's as part of the sort of the recreation portfolio, and you've got the ability to do that. I don't think there's anything in there though that authorizes you to do exactly what you're doing here, which really is for deliberate, long-term non-use. This is a frustration that I have, and it's not just me that has it. I hear every day, all the time, from constituents, from local officials, who are increasingly frustrated at the direction that BLM has taken under your lead. Now, keep in mind, the federal government owns 67% of the land in my state, and the biggest share of that is Bureau of Land Management. And so we live as subjects to the Bureau of Land Management. And increasingly, BLM under your leadership seems to have taken an approach that manages these lands like a museum. It's a you can look but you cannot touch sort of approach. These are in people's backyards. You can hardly throw a rock in any direction in Utah and not hit federal land. Now, that portion of the land in my state, the portion of the 67% of the land in my state owned by the federal government, your portion of it amounts to 22 million acres in Utah. That's 7 million acres more than all of the land, not just the federal land, but all the land in the state of West Virginia. And month after month, a sweeping new policy or management plan seems to be imposed by your agency, harming Utahns who rely on the land for their livelihood, who rely on the land for all sorts of things. Now, the agency has strayed pretty far from its statutory mandate to manage this land for multiple use and sustained yield. The conservation rule is a pretty blatant example of this museum approach of you can look but you can't touch, one that's taken over the BLM. And I don't think it can be fairly reconciled with FLPMA. Now, Neda Wolf-Culver currently serves as the Director of Policy and Programs at BLM. And as you know, Ms. Culver previously worked as Senior Counsel and Director of the BLM Action Center at the Wilderness Society. While in that position, Ms. Culver was personally involved in advocacy and litigation regarding travel management planning and route closures in Utah. And in fact, Ms. Culver helped negotiate the settlement agreement a few years ago between various environmental NGOs and the Obama administration that established the process and the timelines for updating Utah travel management plans. Last fall, BLM closed 317 miles of historic roads in Utah as part of the update to the Labyrinth, RIMS, Gemini Bridges travel management plan. Director Stone Manning, Ms. Culver reports to you in her current role as Deputy Director. So I'd like a yes or no answer on this. Did Ms. Culver have any involvement in the decision-making for the Labyrinth RIMS plan?
Principal Deputy Director Culver does report to me, and the Labyrinth Travel Management Plan decision came from the ground where it should come from. And it was a part of a legal settlement. We got sued and...
No, I get that, but that's not my question. My question is whether she herself had any involvement in that.
Senator, decisions like that sometimes come to headquarters for review. I don't know if that particular plan came for review or not.
Okay, so look, she either recused herself from that decision or she didn't. Which is it?
Senator, she worked for the Wilderness Society and was wildly competent in that job.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Seven or eight.
That is not the subject of my question. What I want to know is, was she or was she not involved in that?
She does not have to recuse herself from the Wilderness Society. She is out of the recusal period.
Okay, so you're saying that it's okay for someone with a history of advocacy and litigation on these routes, not just routes like these, but on these specific routes. She was involved in litigation as an advocate specifically on these routes. Her name, I believe, is on the settlement, the consent decree documents that resulted in this process. saying that it's okay for her to do this and that she can impartially oversee the BLM's travel management planning in that area.
Senator, we adhere to high ethical standards at the department, and we've done so here.
All right.
Senator.
Can I ask one follow-up? I'll be quick.
Very quickly, please.
All right, look, your updated Western Solar Plan expands solar development on public lands. How are you going to ensure that the expansion doesn't disproportionately limit other critical land uses, things like recreation and wildlife conservation and grazing?
Yeah, Senator, you've hit the nail on the head on what we do every day, right, is balance all of those uses. And the Western Solar Plan is going to help us guide solar development to places so that those decisions become more durable. So we've got this programmatic look at where development should go so that when we do the individual NEPA analysis, it becomes more durable.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Lee.
Why was President Trump allowed to take the stage at 6:02 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after multiple suspicious person reports were provided, complete with photos and information suggesting that the assailant had a rangefinder, something that ordinary people don't use in this kind of circumstance?
Senator, again, it was suspicion, not weapon, or there was never communication of that there was an individual with a gun or threat or other bad intentions.
How many suspicious person reports did you receive that day?
I'll get back to you on the exact number, but there were other individuals that came to the attention of law enforcement that day.
Would President Biden ever be allowed on stage under similar circumstances with an unresolved set of multiple suspicious person reports provided, including indicating that there was a rangefinder involved?
Senator, I can tell you that a suspicious person on the outer perimeter with local law enforcement attempting to locate would happen, but I would need more information as far as whether or not we would allow the president to go on or off. Again, for us, it comes down to weapon, a potential threat. Is the individual carrying an IED? Is there a weapon? Is there some other factor that now ramps up our attention to let's hold off on this?
If there were 8 shell casings found next to the assailant's body, but he was neutralized after the first shot, where did those other shots come from? Where did the other shots go?
As far as the assailant's shooting?
Yes. So did the assailant get out 8 shots, or were those shell casings left from the day before? Where did they come from?
The shooter, Senator, we believe fired 8 rounds. We had the shooting reconstruction team go out there for a period of days and collect all that. So we have bullet holes, bullet fragmentation, all taken back, and we're still putting together the trajectory and ballistic analysis, although we do have fragments of the bullets, and bullets have been collected in the distance from the shooter's weapon.
Gotcha. It's my understanding that there was a sniper team assigned to a window with complete overlook, complete view of the roof, the same rooftop, sloped rooftop, where the shots were fired. It's also my understanding, according to some whistleblower accounts, that post was abandoned. What can you tell me about that? Why was it abandoned?
So I saw that from the colonel's testimony, sir, and it's something that I've asked and our mission assurance is getting to the bottom of. And there were two-man counter-sniper teams from the locals that were in that AGR building.
And so at some point they just left?
That I don't have an answer for you on that, Senator, but it seems to me that if even one of them left, there should have been remaining some additional eyes left in that building.
Yep. That seems like something that maybe should be one of the very first questions you address. I'm actually surprised that you don't know that already, and I'd ask that you submit to us in writing what you learn as soon as you learn it. Will you commit to that?
Yes, sir.
What can you tell me about, well, let me just state this way. Multiple requests were made by Trump's protective detail and by Trump's campaign team to the Secret Service for additional resources. I'm told that those were denied. And as I recall, the Secret Service spokesperson initially denied that such requests were made and denied. Why not tell the truth from the outset? What were they trying to do there?
So, Senator, I don't think there was any intention to mislead.
Seems like a pretty material fact, doesn't it?
I saw that report. Go ahead, Senator.
Will you commit to me that you will submit to us in writing what requests were made by whom, and to whom, and when they were denied?
I will, sir.
Okay. Look, at the end of the day, we're looking at a situation in which, at a minimum, people knew that this guy had a gun at least 2 minutes before the shooting happened. I want to know what you can tell me about what happened during that final 2-minute period, where a whole bunch of people in the crowd saw and were shouting, "He's got a gun." During that 2-minute period, perhaps at the beginning of it, the local police started to climb the rooftop, and there was at least 30 seconds after which local police were able to personally observe the shooter with a gun, had the gun pointed at him. What happened during that time period, and why on earth was President Trump not removed from the stage at that moment?
So again, Senator, the reason why President Trump was not removed was, again, we did not have anything more than locals working an issue at the 3 o'clock. Wasn't determined as to whether or not it was the same individual or not, and there was no report of
The same individual as what?
the same suspicious individual.
Right, but we've left the category of suspicious individual at that point. You've got a guy with a gun on a rooftop 136 yards away from the stage. You know that he's got a gun at that point. What happened during that time period that did not result in President Trump, his protective detail, being notified of that and him immediately being removed from the situation?
Senator, what I will say, and then I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Abate. No information regarding a weapon on the roof was ever passed to our personnel.
How is that even possible? Do you want to comment to that?
Senator, again, I believe that information, and this is probably something my colleague can expound on, information that was in law enforcement, local law enforcement channels, but did not cross over and make it to Secret Service awareness.
Senator, just to clarify the timeline, so the individual was first seen by law enforcement on the roof at about 6:08. We're still working to perfect the timeline based on the radio comms and all that. It wasn't until at 6:11:03 seconds, the officer saw him and called out his arm. That was the first sighting where he had the rifle on the roof, and then he...
And that was relayed to the Secret Service Command Center at that point?
My understanding is no, Secret Service, it was not relayed to them. It's a narrower time frame, though. It's probably about maybe up to half a minute between the time he's seen with the rifle and when the shots are fired.
But there's still time. At that point, if there were an open channel of communication in which they were able to tell him, he's got a gun, take him out. You could still take President Trump off the stage. You could have him duck. You could have the shooter neutralized. Do you not have a channel of communication by which they can say, gun, take him out?
So again, Senator, that information stayed in local channels and did not make it over to Secret Service.
Did they not consider that relevant?
You're
You're saying that the local police didn't consider that relevant enough to pass along to the Secret Service?
Sir, I think that they were in the midst of dealing with a very critical situation, and they articulated that over the radio, as I understand it. However, it was never relayed over to us.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Rowe, can you put your first post